All right. Okay.
Perfect.
I'm going to get myself off of there because, God, I don't want to see me and I don't want anybody else to have to see me. Okay. So if everybody can hear me, that's great. If not, I won't know anyway, so I'll just be talking. I'm sorry I can't be there. I was hoping to be there in person, but Sunday night I tested positive for COVID, so I've been having a fun week with that. And I'm sure plenty of people have probably had it, and they don't want to hear about me. So my presentation is PREA, and maybe a quick introduction. I've worked for the Department of Corrections since 1983. Probably a lot of people in the room weren't even born. I worked at the prison for about just under 10 years, and then transferred in 1992 to adult probation and parole, where I worked for about 13 years as a parole officer. And then since then, I've worked in our administration. I'm our PREA coordinator, and my next presentation, I think, is immediately after this, and I'm also our victim coordinator. And I have a few other assignments as well, but that I won't bore you with that. So I appreciate Liliana and her presentation. I enjoyed watching that. So this is going to be a little more specific to the Utah Department of Corrections and what we do. Crap. Well, I'm having a hell of a time advancing the screen here. There we go. So not too much detail on the history. Liliana kind of touched on that. I'm going to go through this quickly, but a couple of things I wanted to hit. 2003, President Bush signs the PREA into law. It doesn't really take effect, binding until 2013. 2005, the Department of Justice did a PREA survey in at least one prison in every state. At that time, they came out to the Draper site. We provided our entire roster. They picked 350 names at random. And then those folks went into a room with a computer. The first question was, in the last year, have you been sexually assaulted? And if the answer was yes, then there were follow-up questions, such as, what was the level of assault? Did you report it? If you did, what was the reaction? Those kinds of things. About 4% of the people who took the survey indicated there had been some kind of sexual assault, which also included sexual harassment, not necessarily just hands-on. It wasn't particularly helpful for us. One thing that people may not realize that's quite unique about the Draper prison, and it will be the same when that prison moves next month to Salt Lake, and that is that we have women on the same compound. We have women with maximum security inmates, not in the same facilities, but most states have those prisons in different parts of their state. So that survey included, we were the only prison that included women with men. We had mentally ill offenders with maximum security offenders and medium security offenders. Anyway, it wasn't really that beneficial because it didn't really give us any kind of guidelines as to where most of those assaults might be coming from. But that was an interesting survey. 2008 is when the Gunnison prison was surveyed, and the percentage was lower. It was about a little over 2%. The jail audits in 2006, the only ones I remember were Utah County and Uintah County. And the Uintah County, I don't think had any, and the Utah County jail had just a handful, I think. 2012, a similar survey, again at the Draper site. We requested from the Justice Department that perhaps they just pick one part of the prison. I was hoping they would pick the women's prison. It's still, I think, the prison where we get probably the most, we get by far the fewest referrals. And I think sometimes that's a facility where we don't get the reports that we probably should. Anyway, The survey was the same. It was men with women and different levels, and the numbers were about identical. Final standards come out in 2012. States have 1 year to then state whether they are PREA compliant or moving towards compliant or not going to be following the PREA standards. And as Liliana said, the decision was made at that time that Utah would not be one of the states that would be PREA compliant. One of the standards that and I should mention this, it's something we feel like we have resolved, but not entirely. And that is, one of the final standards is that if you have an offender under the age of 18 in an adult facility, so this would be someone who's been certified as an adult, if they are in your facility, they cannot be housed within sight or sound of inmates 18 and older. Fortunately, the state of Utah is very reluctant to certify juveniles as adults. We currently don't have any, but periodically we will have one or two. Those crimes are usually quite significant. They're usually almost always for a murder charge. We have an agreement with the juvenile justice system that they will house those folks until they turn 18 or 21, and now they can even hold people up to the age of 25. And that's been the agreement we've had. However, we did have about 3 years ago, one of those folks in a juvenile facility assaulted someone else and they were sent to us anyway. That poses a real problem for us. That would require us to have them in a section by themselves with staff monitoring that section, et cetera. So we hope we have a little more firm footing with the juveniles now on that, but that's something that we realize could still rear up on us, and it would be a problem. So the governor had 3 options, as every state governor did. One was to say your state was PREA compliant. The other was to say we're moving towards compliance, but we're not there, and then that we will not adhere to the standards. So as Liliana mentioned, the governor speaks for state facilities. So that would be the 2 prisons and the juvenile justice system, any kind of lockup in any of those. So that includes both prisons, our 4 halfway houses. For the juveniles, it's for their lockups, and also for group homes where they have people who are being held there for whatever reasons. However, when Liliana said that he's not responsible for the county jails, that would be true except in Utah, and it's not just Utah. 18 of our county jails hold state inmates. And so the governor is also speaking for those 18 county jails. We have over 1,500 state inmates in county jails throughout the state. The only jails where we don't have state inmates are the 3 biggest jails, Weber, Salt Lake, and Utah County. Those jails would be accountable for their own report as to whether or not they're going to be PREA compliant. But since we have state inmates in those other county jails, they also fall under the governor's purview as far as if he's going to say that we're going to be moving towards compliance. And I'm not trying to point fingers, but a lot of those counties, especially rural counties, have expressed some concern that this would be a financial burden if they were required to meet all of the PREA standards. That's something we are certainly hoping to work with there to help. We would like to be on that, at least on that second number 2, moving towards compliance. We don't particularly like being on the naughty list, but so be it. At the time, our director, Roland Cook, who was the director at the time, requested that the governor send assurances to the DOJ that we were moving towards compliance, but that did not happen. And again, I'm not casting blame. There were reasons why people were concerned about being able to be compliant, especially, and quite frankly, at that time, the prison, the juvenile justice system, or the county jails were not in that realm. To date, there are 20 states that are certified compliance, plus Washington, D.C. There are 27 states that are moving towards compliance. They've given those assurances, and that includes Guam, in addition to those 27 states, Guam and Puerto Rico. Alaska has now fallen in with Utah and Arkansas on the naughty list. There are 3 states now that are not following or not intending to be PREA compliant. Kind of interesting. So quickly, in Utah, 2004 is when we really ramped this up. George Bush signed that document at the end of 2003, and 2004 is when I think things started to happen around the country. We did some training. UCASA helped with a 40-hour training for about 140 of our staff, upper level therapists, those folks. And then we did training for all of our staff, orientation for all of the offenders. And now everybody gets that training and orientation, and all staff get training. I think I covered that all right here. Ongoing training, all cadets receive 4-hour PREA training. Civilian staff, 2 hours. I'm not sure why we do fewer, but their training only lasts 4 days, as opposed to cadets are there for about 15 weeks. Existing staff, 2 hours every year online. And then this coming training year, we'll be doing 4 hours in the classroom again with all of our staff. I just wanted to say that one of the things that's always been upsetting to me, and I think to our department, is when it's brought up in the press and other areas that Utah is on the naughty list. There is this implication there that we don't care about sexual assault. We're not doing anything, which couldn't be further from the truth. I'm not saying we couldn't do more, and I'm excited over the fact that we are going to start doing a lot more about this. But I just wanted to say all of our allegations of sexual assault are responded to. An investigator from Law Enforcement Bureau responds to every one of these. This includes, if for example, this happened last week, two inmates caught having sex in their cell. Both of them claimed it was consensual. If that's the case, that's not PREA, but we still separate the two. We interview the two separately, and we will always say to them, look, you're saying it's consensual, but if it's not, and you're only saying that because you're being pressured into saying it's consensual, or at any time you decide you want to come forward and say that wasn't the case, we will treat this as a PREA incident. But if they maintain it's consensual, then it's consensual, and then that's not a PREA incident. It's obviously a violation of the prison rules, and there's repercussions for that. There's a write-up, there's disciplinary actions. But again, we have our own in-house SART team, basically modeled on the community. It uses actually staff members. Some of our case managers play the role as a victim advocate. We realize that's not entirely beneficial, but there is some benefit there. I think we are excited to be expanding with rape recovery for sure. It will be much better. But we do respond to everybody. We offer mental health, we offer medical, and we have ongoing follow-up. And I think in later slides, I do point out the video that Liliana showed of Joe. And interestingly, I use a different Joe video when I teach training to our cadets. And sadly, Joe died about 3 months ago. I saw that from the PREA Resource Center, which is sad to hear. He was a great resource for this movement. And we provide access to medical and mental health services. And that includes if someone wants to be tested for any kind of infectious diseases. We have an infectious disease nurse at both prisons that will do follow-up there. I like this quote from 2006, and Liliana alluded to this perception that was out there and still is in many ways. Prison rape seems to be an accepted norm and almost expected in the prison environment, and therefore difficult to address and prevent. There has been, and there continues to be, people who have very little concern or empathy for someone who is sexually assaulted within the prison system. There is that, if you didn't want to be sexually assaulted, you shouldn't have gone to prison. And some people think it's that's part of the process. I remember the first time I taught a class to our staff, to our security staff, our correctional officers. I was looking at the newspaper that morning, and there was a cartoon in the Tribune because we had just received Warren Jeffs into the prison, and the cartoon was a very skinny, scared Warren Jeffs sitting on a bench with a very large offender arm draped over him, and the caption said, "Warren Jeffs, meet your new wife." Which there may be an element of humor there, but there is that kind of thing that's kind of what happens when you come to prison. And if you didn't want to come to prison, then if you didn't want to be sexually assaulted, you shouldn't have committed a crime and you shouldn't have gone to prison. One of the things we certainly instill in our officers is that we are held to a higher standard. We don't belittle someone who reports this. We don't react dismissively. We don't denigrate the person regardless of what their crime is. And I'll kind of talk about that later. That is something we insist upon. And I have really not seen people cross that line in my experience. and point out that the punishment is prison. The punishment does not include sexual assault. The punishment for the crime when they come to prison is going to prison. Going to prison is a burden, and it's certainly no picnic. It's a challenging, difficult environment for anybody to try and navigate. And when you throw assault, especially sexual assault, in, it becomes really unbearable for people. Some of the things we talk about with our staff and also with the people that we incarcerate is reasons why people don't report sexual assault. And these apply to universally, certainly in the community. Shame, won't be believed, all those things you can see on that list, everybody knows those. People that are incarcerated, some of those are certainly heightened. Fear of being labeled a snitch, that is a huge thing. Fear of being assaulted. Fear of being moved to a different facility. This is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have, certainly one of the biggest challenges that I have, because after we have a sexual assault, if it's cellmates, and quite frankly, over 90% of the reports we get are between cellmates. They are never going to be living together again. We're going to be moving one or both. And our biggest priority is safety. We now have to keep someone safe, someone who is vulnerable. We have to put them somewhere safe. And sometimes moving them to a safer place will cause them to lose some of those privileges that are important. Work, school, programs, we certainly don't try to do that. We don't want someone to feel like they're being punished for being sexually assaulted. And so those things, navigating those moves, navigating that so that people feel like they're not being even further abused by being placed somewhere where they don't want to be, is a challenge for us. When I for the first 4 or 5 years I worked at the prison, there was no such thing as double bunking. There was always one person in a cell. We didn't realize how good we had it until double bunking came along. Quite frankly, probably the safest place we have at the prison is a facility at the Draper site called Ochre 5. It's a dorm setting. That's where we have most of our elderly offenders. I've never had a single report from that dorm. The only ones we've had are one incident in a bathroom there and one in a shower. Otherwise, that's a safe place, but it's probably not a place where people want to be because they don't have their own privacy so much, but there's also no privacy. And so it makes it very difficult for someone to sexually assault someone without being seen. Anyway, we talk about what we can do to increase reports, and this is certainly some training we've had with our staff and with our investigative team. Remove that bias directed at victims. You know, one of the things that we've certainly done extensive training that we saw initially some of those questions that might not seem harmful that people would ask after someone reported being sexually assaulted, especially if they said, this happened 4 or 5 days ago. You know, the training is don't say to them, why didn't you report it then? That is maybe important to know. It certainly helps us in the future, but there's different ways to address that question, ask that question, so it doesn't look like we're blaming someone for not reporting. Was there a reason why you couldn't report then? Or maybe even I've taken it, I'm assuming that you didn't feel safe to report then, and then we'll usually get some follow-up. Yes, my cellmate threatened that if I reported it, I would be whatever, killed, beaten up. And the threats are very, very substantial in the Utah State Prison, as they are anywhere in a lockup facility. Proactive investigations, not combative. Some of this we gleaned from West Valley City years ago when they changed their complete approach to how they investigated sexual assaults. They changed the room where they did the interviews, made it similar to a Children's Justice Center with big windows and a couch and pastel colors, those kinds of things. We don't have that at the prison, but we do have the ability to treat this as a more of a dialogue than it is combative. We can also do what follow the guidelines from a police officer shooting. When there's a police officer shooting, a police officer doesn't appear before a shooting review board for at least 48 hours for 2 sleep cycles, for obvious reasons, because it's traumatic and you want them to readjust to get their brain back to normal so that they can give a narrative that makes sense. So we will have follow-up interviews. When an offender is sexually assaulted, that's traumatic. And obviously there has to be an initial interview because we have a suspect and we need to get things rolling. But we can have the follow-up interview a couple days later to get more accurate information, because we want that. If we're going to get successful prosecutions, we need good investigations. Also, all of these things lead to more of a belief by the people we incarcerate that if they come forward, they're going to be believed, that are going to be taken seriously. And if we take these approaches, people are going to be more inclined to feel safe to report. So these are all important. Again, as Liliana mentioned, these are the 3-pronged approach to PREA: prevention, detection, response. So we want to do things to try and prevent these from happening. For our people, that starts at intake. This is just kind of the preamble to our policy. It is the policy of the Utah Department of Corrections to provide a safe, humane, and appropriately secure environment free from the threat of sexual assault for all offenders by maintaining a program of prevention, detection, response, investigation, and tracking. That starts at intake. When we have people come in, and we do have a little bit of an advantage as opposed to the jails. When we get people into the prison, they've already been in the jail. We have some documentation that comes with them. Some of that will give us some information about, hopefully it will at least, about their medical history, their mental health history. And they will be followed up when they get to the prison with someone from our medical team and someone from mental health to go through some of the screening is fairly quick, and then it becomes more extensive over their time in reception and orientation, which everybody goes through. So some of the things we are looking for that would indicate that someone might be vulnerable in the prison institution. The first one is a no-brainer. If you've been sexually assaulted before in an institution, we know that person is vulnerable. Youth, elderly, again, this is not something that we've had much of an issue with on the elderly. But again, we house most of them in a dorm setting. And that doesn't mean that it's not happening, it's not being reported, but we certainly have not had much come out of that population. Small in stature, I have at the end there, not STG, and I'm assuming everybody doesn't know what that designation is. That's a strategic threat group, and that's how we identify our gang members in the prison. So if they're small, but they are a gang member, they may very well not be vulnerable if they are part of a gang and kind of get absorbed by that community. The developmental disability, mental illness, those were talked about. First incarceration, sex offender, especially if they're child victims. And I'll talk about that more at the end. If you want to talk about the people that are most commonly targeted at the Utah State Prison, they are overwhelmingly our biggest population that are victims. So if they identify as LGBTI, or even if they don't, but they have kind of an effeminate presentation. History of sexual victimization, history of institutional sexual activity, all of those apply. Some of them are more prominent than others when we're looking at people who might be vulnerable. The list of predators is shorter. Obviously, the first one's a no-brainer, but these are certainly things that we have that play out. These are identified by the PREA Resource Center, and we've seen them play out. Domestic violence, those folks oftentimes are our abusers. One of the things about gang affiliation that's interesting is we hear this, but we don't get it reported very often at all. We hear that we have gang members sexually abusing rival gang members as kind of the highest level of humiliation, or gang members sexually abusing the same members from the same gang for whatever reason, as some kind of a payback. But those folks we rarely get someone from a gang affiliated offender that comes forward and says they've been sexually assaulted. Anyway, that list is valid, and it's something we take note of. This is obviously part of PREA. The PREA standard says that people are incarcerated folks who identify as transgender. We treat them on a case-by-case basis. Housing preference, the things that we certainly do, they can be strip searched privately, so they're not strip searched in front of other offenders. Shower separately, that isn't an issue at our prison. I'm not sure how it is at the county jails. We don't have any group showers at the Utah State Prison. They're all individual showers, regardless of which prison, in Draper or Gunnison. So if we see, as we have occasionally, if there are 4 feet in the shower instead of 2, then that's a problem. But that is not an issue that if people want to shower separately. For clothing for trans females that have breast from hormones, we provide a sports bra. This is an ongoing thing for us dealing with, we have a transgender policy. Excuse me. The COVID cough's been fun. To minimize the cough, I drank a pint of gin before this meeting. Just kidding. It's half a pint. No, again, no kidding. We have a transgender.
A hot toddy.
We have a transgender committee, and we meet monthly. And so a lot of these issues with transgender offenders are still fluid. We have a contract psychologist that we refer transgender offenders to for an evaluation. She gives us feedback as to maybe what she feels is appropriate as far as proceeding with things like clothing, housing assignments, cosmetic items, those kinds of things. So it's still a work in progress, but it's something we are very, I feel like we're proactively involved in, and it's still fluid. We have a fairly robust transgender committee from all areas of the institution. And I I don't even know what time it is, for hell's sakes. Oh, I got to get going here. Sorry, I'm talking too much. Yeah, if I don't even have my phone number at the end of this. I'm making excuses because I haven't felt too well, but this could be better. So we do have posters up throughout the prison and jails that have the PREA hotline number. That Liliana mentioned the PREA hotline. That has been, I can't say it's been a giant success, and a lot of it was based upon the picture that Liliana showed. You know, the phones are in a phone bank, and it's difficult for someone to get onto that hotline and feel like they can speak confidentially without being overheard. That number is a confidential call. If an offender makes a phone call, they have to put in their offender number. The number they're calling has to be approved. The PREA hotline number, though, is confidential. They don't have to identify themselves. There's no charge for the call. And what happens is it goes to a voice machine in each of our shift commander offices in the 2 prisons. So a light up, we have a fairly large light, lights up on the top. They know there's been a phone call left. The shift commander will then listen to the call. And we have it in the shift commander's office because those have 24/7, someone in there 24/7. They listen to the call and then appropriately send out, disseminate whatever the information from the call was. Another, but probably even a larger reason why that hotline number is not used is because, again, over 90%, it's about 93% of all of our PREA reports are between cellmates. And so you have the perpetrator in that instance who is making threats that you better not be getting on the phone and making a call. I frequently asked people, did you consider using the PREA hotline? And it's usually one of those 2 reasons why they did not. One is that they didn't feel like they could get on there without being overheard, or they were threatened not to use the hotline. I want to just touch on that for a moment. Some of the threats used by abusers are fairly insidious, and they've become pervasive. And one of the ones that we've seen or heard about over the last, say, 18 months to 2 years is that, and it's interesting how this information obviously gets passed around. The abuser will have access to the victim's mail correspondence. And so the threat will be something like, if you report this, I know where your wife, Sally, and your little kids, whatever they are, you know, Billy and Susie live. I have friends out there and they'll be happy to go pay them a visit. I would imagine most of those threats probably can't be carried out, but that's a real concern for someone who's the victim of these threats. Again, it's a very difficult thing to navigate within the institution. We're hoping that people feel comfortable reporting, but there are reasons why we know why they don't, and those are some of those reasons. Some of the things that we go over with through orientation, and so I don't miss this. Liliana mentioned that Rape Recovery assigned a designated PREA advocate. And Liz Landry is her name, and she's absolutely wonderful. I work with her quite frequently. Every week we correspond. We have different meetings set up. She's going to come and attend a captain's and lieutenant's meeting so she can meet everybody. We've got her hooked up with our community groups that we have that meet with folks at the prison. We have a group that consists of people like from the NAACP and the ACLU and prison advocate groups from the community that she will be part of. So we're really excited about that. But one of the things we are going to be doing is creating new orientation videos that will include Liz Landry and I think Sonia from Rape Recovery. We're going to do a separate video for the men and the women's prisons because they are unique to each other in a lot of ways. Anyway, those are some of the things that we do. We try to instill this in offenders that someone may try to groom you, and Liliana talked about that. Having worked at the prison for a number of years, this is a real difficult challenge. When you have someone come into the prison and you have that 24-year-old who looks like he's 16 and he's never been in trouble before, and those folks stick out, and you'll have somebody that will come to them and say, hey, and offer them some commissary. It used to be cigarettes. That's not the, we don't have those anymore, but it'll be something, candy bar, coffee, something. And then tell them, look, let's tell the staff that you want to live together. I will take care of you. I will protect you from these other bad guys here. And so part of the training is with our staff, so that when these people come forward and say, we'd like to live together, that we're looking for those red flags, that this individual that's been with us for 20 years really has no business being with this person who's been with us for 20 minutes. As staff, I can tell you, as staff, you want people who want to live together to be in the same cell, because obviously, if people want to be housed together, that at least creates the illusion maybe that you're not going to have problems with those folks. Anyway, those are some of the things we try to instill with people, and we try to have, and then we talk about reporting mechanisms for these folks. Any staff member you can report to, the PREA hotline, medical staff. Everybody in the prison has a case manager. They have a caseload, usually about 40 people, but they meet with them at least every other week. And that's somebody that we hope that they have that kind of rapport with, that they feel that they can communicate any kind of concerns like that. We have access to mental health. There's volunteers that are now coming back into the institution. COVID certainly put the brakes on a lot of this. And then sometimes we will get reports from family members based on a letter or a phone call that, my son, daughter has experienced some kind of sexual assault. Whenever this is reported, and the video with Joe is heartbreaking, if we have someone report that they've been sexually assaulted, they're getting separated. They will never be cellmates again. Depending on the time frame, if it's between cellmates, they're both going to be moved out of there to separate places. That cell becomes a crime scene. We have investigations who respond immediately. Our SART team, mental health is made available, medical if needed, and CODARs take place if needed. One of the things we are working on the CODAR is that we currently do not have a SANE nurse that we've been able to find that will respond to the prison in Gunnison. Liliana, I know, was looking into a SANE nurse in Ephraim, which would be great. We've also reached out to one in Richfield, because as it is right now, if we have a rape or any kind of an incident that would precipitate a CODAR exam, that person, if that's at the Gunnison prison, is transported to the Draper prison. And that's not necessarily what those folks want, being moved from one prison to another. So that is something that is still a work in progress, and I hope we can find someone that will respond to the Gunnison prison. And it's not like these happen all the time. They're fairly infrequent, more so at that prison than at the Draper site. Some of the things we train with staff, look for those unusual pairings, that brand new young kid with an older guy. Some things, any PREA history is in our, OTRAC is our offender track. That's the computer track that everybody has access to. And if there's been a PREA incident, that'll show up in the caution screen. And so we should be checking, is this person been a victim of sexual assault in the past, or have they been the perpetrator of sexual assault in the past, which will certainly be helpful in how we house people together or not together, as the case may be. Blind spot areas, we don't really have a lot of those at the prison. At the new prison, they will be non-existent, which will be nice. The new prison in Salt Lake is going to be a huge, I think, step forward. It's just, first of all, it's modern, a lot more windows, a lot more natural light. I know that I spent about 1.5 years working in our Uinta 1 facility, which is our most secure facility. And I was depressed about every day I worked there. I can't even imagine someone who has to live in that environment. We won't have that anymore. Hopefully that will lend itself to people being more inclined to, I don't know, be less inclined to be sexual assault behavior. The cells are a lot more transparent with the way they're set up. It's a lot more difficult to hide behavior in a cell than it is now. Hopefully that's a huge benefit for us. Look for negative changes in an offender's behavior. They're not showering anymore, or they used to come out and talk, they don't anymore. They have bruises, and typically if someone has a bruise or a black eye, they're not going to tell you, yes, my cellmate or somebody smacked me in the face. They're going to say something like, I fell off of my bunk, or I ran into the door, something like that. No one believes that, but we should be following up with those.
Hey, Doug.
Yo.
There's a question in the chat, and it says, do they keep the perpetrator in a separate cell after the incident so they cannot victimize someone else?
Yeah, I wish that was true. Sometimes the problem is we just don't have that kind of ability. We don't have that many cells that are just single cell. The Uinta 1 facility, which I just referred to, has 96 beds, and they are all single celled. Those are for our most predatory and violent offenders. So yes, some of them end up there, but unfortunately 14 of the people there are in there because they have killed someone in the prison. Those are people that are never going to be housed with someone else. And I think you would agree that has to be a priority. So those are 14 cells already. Then we have other people that are in some of our most violent. The prison has, I'm sorry, I keep going off on these tangents, but the prison has changed so much since I worked there. When I left there in 1992, and we have these annual reports that come out to kind of track our populations. 6% of all offenders were affiliated with a gang in 1992. It's now 25%. Over 90% of all of the assaults that occur in the prison are between gang members. Sometimes it's rival gangs. We've also seen a high increase of the same gang attacking a member of the same gang. Those become fairly mysterious, but obviously something went wrong or something went amiss. Those often include stabbings. And so those folks, the most violent of those folks end up in those cells as well. This isn't necessarily sexual assaults. We certainly try to keep them into more secure facilities. So we also have other Uinta facilities which are maximum security facilities. And so we would like to think that we have someone who is a predator housed with someone else who might be, I don't want to say also a predator, but someone who's not going to be a victim. It is a real challenge, the way we house people. In the new prison, there's going to be a lot more direct supervision where you have an officer, and we have, quite frankly, we have some officers that are a little bit worried about this. The officer, instead of being in a control room, will be at a desk with a computer right in the middle of the section with the incarcerated folks out and about surrounding him the whole time. That typically, if you look historically around the country, works better if people are out and about. One of the things I learned when I worked at the prison, and it certainly remains true, is that unlike what you might see in TV shows or movies, is that probably 90% of people that are incarcerated want staff to be present. If staff are present, things are less likely to happen, like sexual assaults or other assaults or things like that. They want staff around. This is a real concern. Oh boy, I'm getting so far behind. Yeah, but I'll bring it up anyway. This is a real concern right now. We are about, I won't give the number because I've been asked not to, but we are incredibly short of our staff. We are running at about 60% of what we should have as far as certified staff. The new prison actually requires more staff than the Draper site. And so that is certainly a concern for us. Excuse me. Is keeping people safe by having staff presence. If you're a perpetrator, you don't want staff around, right? If you're someone who's going to be sexually assaulting other offenders, you want staff to not be present. Again, the majority of these that were reported at least take place between cellmates, and those take place overnight when there's fewer people on, everybody's locked down, there's nobody out and about. You have a staff member coming around and doing a count every hour, a security check sometimes, but there's going to be a window probably where people can get away with this without being seen by a staff member. Again, that will be less, they'll have less ability to do so in the new prison just because of the way the cells are set up, as far as being able to see into the cell. Some of the improvements we're looking at. What am I on time? Although I'm the next presenter, so if I go over, what the hell? Not to belabor too much what Liliana said, because I don't want to repeat all of that. But House Bill 95 certainly is, and I think maybe there was a sense that the department would be opposing this, and I hope that hasn't been the reception that the Rape Recovery and UCASA has felt like they've gotten from us. I'm really excited about this. We want people who have been sexually assaulted to feel like they have an avenue to talk to somebody. We know it's not always easy to talk to someone who works at the institution. There's always going to be a certain level of bias that this person maybe is just looking out for the institution and maybe not looking out for the welfare of an offender. So the access of victim advocates from outside the facility to be able to speak, whether that's in person, virtually, telephonic correspondence, and they all will be confidential. We've already made arrangements that the mail coming in from the Rape Recovery Center will be treated as the same as legal mail, which is confidential mail. That's interesting, you know, and I had that conversation with Rape Recovery, because what you don't want an envelope coming in that says Rape Recovery Center on it. One of the things that we always have to guard against is having offenders go back to their cell with something that's going to be incriminating. You don't want them going back with a brochure about sexual assault or an envelope that says the Rape Recovery. So the envelope is very, it doesn't say anything really. I think it says RRC in small letters, which maybe we'll come up with some bullshit thing for RRC. I don't know. Reformed Roman Catholics. That's not fair. I don't know, but it'll be something. Anyway, those things are a concern. And even having Liliana referred to that. If someone comes out and meets with an offender, to make sure that they're in a place where they're not going to be seen by other of our incarcerated people. And when I meet with them, I make sure I pull them out of the unit they're in so that nobody sees me. A lot of people know I'm the PREA guy. And when we conclude our meeting, the last thing we'll talk about is when you go back to your section, what are you going to say? Who are you going to say you met with? It's one of the things you find out about the prison. When someone leaves the facility to go to talk to somebody, people are going to hit them up. Who were you talking to? And so we'll come up with some. I was talking to my attorney. I was talking to my parole officer. I was talking to whoever, but not going to be talking to someone about sexual assault. We have, and we will certainly make it. And Liliana talked about how will someone be notified of a rape exam. That's something we are working with the Family Justice Center saying. They perform our Code R exams at the prison. so that they will contact Rape Recovery so that they can have someone, a representative, come out and be there in person during the rape exam as a support. Those kind of things go a long, long way, and we understand that. And I mentioned we're going to do new videos. Some other things we're working on. Again, I mentioned the transgender efforts that we're working on, Sane Nurse, new prison, modern facility, and we release a report to the legislature. I release a report to the Bureau of Justice Statistics every year. So we'll be releasing the same kind of report to the legislature. Also, this is one of the things I've discussed with Liliana and with Sonia and Liz Landry about doing some training for our staff and for, in particular at the women's prison. I think this would be very beneficial. Liliana mentioned that a lot of the women there come in that with an abusive history. That is certainly the case. Stats would show that it's over 80% of women who are incarcerated have been abused at some time in their life before coming to the institution. And it's not surprising that many of them come in with substance issues, substance problems, and many of them have PTSD and other trauma, and a lot of that abuse was sexual abuse. So we would like help with training our staff and with our the people that we have incarcerated. I was telling Liz Landry that when those PREA videos play in orientation, staff are going to be hearing those as well. And that is kind of an indirect training for staff to hear those PREA videos that are going to talk about, that are going to inform offenders. This is not okay. These are the things that will not be tolerated. You can report them and action must be taken. When staff hear that, that's a reminder that they have to do so as well. These are for the things we report to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. It's 3 categories: substantiated, unsubstantiated, and unfounded. Substantiated means that, like if there's a CODAR, that's substantiated. If we have evidence to indicate there was a sexual assault. Unsubstantiated does not mean we don't believe it happened. It just means we can't substantiate it. So for example, if we have someone say, this happened to me 4 months ago, I'm only reporting it now because my perpetrator finally got moved, or I got moved, and now I feel safe to report. There isn't evidence there to support the allegation, but we still put the wheels in motion. We provide mental health, we provide access, and we will be providing access for those folks if they want to speak to the Rape Crisis Center. Unfounded is if it's something that is determined to be false. And quite frankly, when PREA first started up and I was training staff, we had a lot of that pushback. This was back in 2005, 2006. That, oh, they're just lying. They're just trying to manipulate housing. And people have come to realize that there's no benefit at all from reporting being sexually assaulted. No one wants to be labeled a snitch. No one wants to be, have that, what the incarcerated folks would refer to as a snitch jacket. Nobody wants that. And so the unfounded ones are rare, but we have had a few, but maybe 1 or 2 of those a year. What we have mostly are the substantiated and the unsubstantiated. All of those get reported, along with the report also includes the gender of the victim and perpetrator, the age, the race, which facility it took place in, what actions were taken, those kinds of things. So that's the same report we will now be providing to the legislature as well. Challenges moving forward. Providing those same services to the county jails. We realize that there is not the same kind of access to the same resources, especially in rural counties. And I would certainly speak to people in this audience, because I'm sure we have advocates from rural areas. If you're interested in maybe looking at helping provide some of these resources in those jails, please contact me. We would love to have your help. We will obviously be doing some training. We certainly, it's safety first. Those kind of level of concerns come up. I know for me and for others when we're bringing someone into the institution, especially if considering, and I know this has been said, but I'll say it again. If we have someone meeting person face-to-face with an offender at the prison, that's confidential. There won't be anybody in the room. There won't be a staff member in the room to overhear that. The perpetrator might be shackled to the floor. That I should point out, they're not laying flat on the floor. That's just there's a little attachment in the floor that they'd be shackled to. So we want to make sure that we're not putting someone in a position where they're going to be manipulated or someone's going to find out who they are and maybe track them down at a later date. We certainly, it's safety first, but if you are inclined or interested in maybe helping out with that, we'd love to hear from you. We know that's going to be a challenge for us. The new prison's a challenge as well. This is I realize that anybody can become used to something after a while. Things can be normal. I used to teach at the women's prison. I used to teach a domestic violence class once a month out there. And I would usually have about 15 or 20 women that would come who had been in abusive relationships. And it was interesting when I would ask people to name what are some of the elements of domestic abuse. So, they would name things off like the physical abuse or emotional, psychological, isolation, all the things that go into domestic abuse. And inevitably, one or two people in the group would say, I never knew I was in a domestic abusive relationship until I saw that list. So I know that we have a lot of our incarcerated folks are very nervous about moving to this new prison. One of the things that will be at the new prison is instead of 2 people to a cell, we have 8 people in some of the cells. The idea being that if there's 8 people in the cell, it's less likely that someone's going to assault someone else. Hopefully we don't have 7 people assaulting someone, but even though studies from other prisons around the country would indicate those kind of assaults are less likely and when there's 8 people in the cell, that makes a lot of our incarcerated folks very nervous. I was talking to one of them a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, who said, it took me 2 years to find someone I feel comfortable to live with. And now there's going to be 6 other people in that cell. So there's challenges for staff and there's challenges for the people who are incarcerated. I mentioned our officer shortages. And I want to end by talking about our sex offender population. If there's a population that is marginalized, I think universally, it's sex offenders, and it's definitely child sex offenders. So from 2018 to 2021 of our male victims, and by the way, male victims make up about 90% of our PREA reports. We get very, very few reports from the women's prison. And I think it's definitely underreported. And we seldom have the report of something that's violent. It's usually from the women's prison. It's something like maybe some innuendos, someone staring at someone else, like staring at their cellmate, trying to get them to participate in some unwanted sexual activity. So 72% of our male victims were sex offenders. 65% of our victims were child sex offenders. 48% of our perpetrators were adult sex offenders. So I want to put that in perspective. Nationally, 17% of state inmates are sex offenders. In Utah, it's 36%. If I just do men, it's 38%. Women in the women's prison, it's about 7.5% of them are sex offenders. Much, much lower in the women's prison than the men's. And I should have a further stat there. Of our sex offenders, of those 38% that are sex offenders, about 85% of those are child sex offenders. They are, and I don't think that's surprising if you know how the underwhelming success of prosecuting adult sex offender, where the victim is an adult, especially when the victim is a female, those cases are not prosecuted nearly as often as they need to be. So this is a population, quite frankly, that even people outside of the prison, even people I've spoken to that you would think would be sympathetic to prisoners being sexually assaulted, are a little more dismissive of if they're child sex offenders. I think those numbers, instead of going down, will probably go up as we continue to incarcerate fewer and fewer people in for crimes such as drug offenses, which I totally agree with, that we shouldn't be incarcerating those folks like we've done in the past. So those crimes like sex offenses come to the prison. Now, we don't have twice as many sex offenses as other states, but what we do is we incarcerate sex offenders much longer than other states do. And I'm sure you're not going to have a lot of people advocating for lighter sentences for sex offenders, but this is a significant issue for us. One of the things that came from when we started looking at this is that when we have sex offenders in our sex offender treatment program, so those facilities that house sex offenders for sex offender treatment will have child sex offenders in there with adult sex offenders, but we now make sure that they're not housed together so that we don't have adult sex offenders or sex offenders who the victims are adults housed with sex offenders whose victims are child sex offenders. But and truly, the LGBTI community is certainly at risk, and we know that, especially our transgender population. And so we take precautions as to where they are housed. But when about 2,300 of our offenders are sex offenders, it's very difficult to manage those, to move them all to areas that are safe. So this is a huge challenge for us. It's going to be an ongoing challenge. I hope people are not dismissive of child sex offenders who then are the victims of sex offense. Some people think of that as karma. Some people like to think of that as now you know how your victim felt. But this is, again, I would remind people, going to prison is the penalty, not being sexually assaulted. And if you release, as we release people into the community, if they've been sexually assaulted and that has not been dealt with or treated, and they don't have resources when they get out, these folks are not going to do well when they get back into the community. We'll be dealing with them again, maybe with very serious offenses. That's my conclusion on that. I don't know if there's any questions. I know I went a little bit over, and I can cut back into the next one if whatever's needed, but I don't know if there's any questions. All right.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Tally from UOVC, and this is more of an answer to a question I know we've had in the past. And is if grant funds, if it's allowable to serve incarcerated victims with grant funds. And maybe nobody has this question, but the answer is yes. I say that because it used to be prohibited under grant funds, but under the VOCA rule of 2016, they took off that prohibition, and it is allowable to be serving incarcerated victims with grant funds. So that's not something you could maybe say per se if you are serving them, that we can't do that with grant funds. Is actually allowable as you would serve them any other kind of victim.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tally. That is something that's been a nice change. One thing we have decided to do, though, is I know that that rape exams can be paid for through your office, but we've decided we'll pay for those through our department. That's at least something we can do to not contribute to the money you pay out. At least for now, we're I shouldn't say we're happy to do it because we don't want to be having rape exams, but we will continue to pay for those.
That's good, Doug, because your budget's a lot bigger than ours, so we would appreciate that.
So do you want me to launch into my next one?
Do you feel like you'll need the full? Let's actually just take a quick break.
Okay, good. Then I can figure